So that's all the carcass done, so I need to now assemble it. It's going to just be glued and then a face frame going on it, but one of the biggest issues is that I don't have clamps. I've got some pretty long clamps, but I don't have any that are 1.7 meters long. So for this, what I'm going to do is use the Domino DF500 connector, which I'll show you a little bit more in a minute. But essentially, it's got a good holding force. I'm about 460 mil wide from front to back, and then we're having about a 20 mil face frame on the front. So the DF500 connectors, I've used them loads before, and they've got a pretty good holding power. So they're gonna basically be strong enough to hold the carcass together with some decent clamping force whilst I then put some glue on it and dry. So by any means, it's not going to be a knockdown cabinet like the DF500 connectors are used for, but in these sort of situations, the connectors come in so handy for clamping things together, basically. So yeah, let's get cracking on getting that carcass together. So I've just got most of them cut on the longer part of the carcass. Essentially, you've got two settings with your DF500 connectors. So on your sort of longer part of your carcass, you need to plunge in 24 mil with the connectors, and what happens is you slot this plastic bit in here, which acts like a bit of a raw plug, and then you use the Festool jig with the Festool bit, of course, where they hit you with quite a hefty price on it, but that then drills a 15 mil hole in the top that then a barrel gets slotted into there. What I'll do in a bit, once I've got the other sides cut, is I will show you how it all goes together. Now on the smaller ones, you need to then reset your domino to 15 mil. Obviously, if we're working with a 19 mil thick veneered panel, we need to keep to the 15 mil plunge so that the counterpart can then go in. So I'll get them cut and then I'll show you how it all goes together. So there's a fair few components that make up the DF500 connector. That's sort of one connection there. Now they all have their counterparts. So in your bottom zone here, as I said before, you've got this sort of plastic acceptor bit. So you plunge in 24 mil deep, get that set in there, and then from there its mating part is this barrel. So you need to line that up pretty straight with there, and then it has an accepting thread for a grub screw in the top. So all you got to do is pop it in. It'll be quite a tight fit, so it might need a bit of persuasion wherever my hammer is. Give me a second. So in there you go, and then that's how the first part of it all looks. From there, you've got your mating side part of the cabinet. Now, there's no real orientation way on this, but this is like the metal raw plug bit, and essentially that goes in there. You've got to keep the domino on the tight setting, and then what you do is you put this matching mating part in here. Now, it has a very small recess there, so it accepts then the grub screws to go in place. And what you do is you pop it in there, it'll go in there, and then the grub screw goes in the top there, tightens down, pulls it all together. Now I don't know what the load or clamping force is on each connector, but as it stands, it's plenty strong to get a carcass like this together when you haven't got the clamps. So yeah, so let's get it together.
All the construction on the unit is now pretty much done. There's a bit of edge banding to do and make some drawer boxes, but to make the most of my time and get this done, the next step now is to get all of the drawer fronts glued up and all of the doors glued up. But before I can do that glue up, what I want to do is start staining. So the cabinet as a whole is matching a prayer cabinet that I made. You can check it out on my Instagram, but same sort of size cabinet, but this is a bit more simple because it's just an office storage unit. Now before I go gluing up, obviously these are veneered panels. I want to pre-finish the panels first before I then go ahead and glue them up. So I'll pre-finish them with 3 coats of Georgian Mid Oak wood dye. So this is the Colron product. You can get it from B&Q, Wicks, the general places. Now in terms of applying this to oak and oak veneer, it can end up quite streaky. So one of the best things or the best application technique I've found is quite simply to just rag it on and then just give it a good wipe down and leave it dry, and you build up however many coats you need on the finish. Typically, to get that sort of darker colour that I'm going for, I need about 3 coats in total. It's water-based dye, so it does raise the grain of the wood quite a lot, so it needs sanding down in between the coats. Now, I don't typically go for a mega sand. I just sort of literally rub it down between coats with 400 grit, but I'm cautious not to sand it too much so that the stain or the wood dye, whatever it is, doesn't penetrate deeply enough, because if you sand it up, you're closing, if you sand it with 400, you're closing the grain quite a lot, so it won't take a lot of the stain. So I only go to 240 grit because it's getting a water-based poly top coat over most of the show faces, and the rest are getting waxed. So I'll move on now to getting these sanded and getting them stained. Blue roll, whatever you want, it doesn't matter that much. Just get a healthy dab on your roll and then just wipe it on. Get all your wet bits of paper off. If you got a rag, it's probably better, but make sure it's a lint-free rag so you don't get it on. And the ragging on, sort of rag on, rag off process that I've found is, well, you rag it on, wipe it on, whatever you call it. It tends to just spread the dye a lot more evenly across it, which means you don't end up with streaks in your final thing and have to strip it off again, which is a bit of a pain. So just do it like that, with a flip, and get some on the other side. Also, it depends on the different types of grain in the veneers, but what you do find is, on the back of some of these panels, it's the grain tends to be, or the veneer tends to be more quarter sawn than your typical crown cut. So you need to pick a consistent side, as what will happen is you'll find it will stain a bit darker on the crown cut side because of the grain than on the quarter sawn side, so you'll get a bit of a lighter panel. So on these drawers and doors, I'm going for the flat sawn sort of sides as the show faces, as I found they tend to be more in line with the colour that the rails and stiles tend to come out at. You can see there, that's a bit deeper than that in my opinion, but you can get your coats on and then decide from there. So I'll do that on all of the panels now, let them dry. I'll also give the insides of all the rails and stiles a quick sand and do the same treatment on them, get about 2-3 coats on them, just because when you're working with this sort of wood dye, it does tend to create blotches in places. So as much as I can minimise that, I'll
and the best I can to minimise it, I'll do what I can, if that makes any sense. So I'll get all of them done.